Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mid-Tier Thoughts. This is episode 21. Sorry about my long absence. I was in the middle of a move, so unfortunately this episode, again, is going to be just me. Just with the logistics of my moving and everything, I haven't had a chance to get a hold of Mike to get back on for another episode, so we're winging it, going solo again this weekend on this episode. So for those who aren't aware, big move for me. I just recently moved from the People's Democratic Republic of Washington State to the free America of Northern Idaho. So loving it here. All the North Idaho guys who have hit me up already on Instagram, you guys are awesome. Hopefully now that I'm actually pretty much done moving and just unpacking the house, I'll be able to meet up with some of you guys and get to the range with some of y'all. You guys have been awesome. So for those who have been following along on my Instagram, and anyone who listened to this last episode, we covered the idea and the concepts of Minuteman, militia, and guerrillas, the differences in between and different mindsets, different things that go into each of them, and kind of like made three distinct classes. So anyone who's been following along with my Instagram, you've seen me kind of break this down even further, and something I'd like to do on this podcast as well. And so I'd like to start off with the idea of logistics, specifically for Minuteman logistics. And the way I want to do this is I kind of want to build up on this and maybe like a mini series through the podcast episodes where we focus on the Minuteman being an individual. Then we will cover a series of topics about how to be a prepared individual. Then we'll branch out into the idea of a militia with the idea of how now that we have a prepared individual, what does this prepared individual do and how does he coordinate with other prepared individuals to become a team and hopefully a militia. Then we will talk about a guerrilla. So in my eyes, I kind of see that as the guerrilla being, far above and beyond the rest of them and being able to basically walk away from everything and do a lot of dirty things behind enemy lines. And a lot of logistics have to go into play for all of these scenarios to work out. And honestly, I don't think anyone can really, it's easy for us to, let me back up. It's easy for us to go out and run and gun and do the shooting and scooting. And a lot of times we don't like to think about logistics. Tactics is super fun, super sexy. Logistics is like tactics nerdy stepsister. That's kind of annoying, kind of weird. People don't really want to do it, but they will. But they have to, right? Logistics win wars, right? If you can have the most badass dudes out in the world, but if they don't have a good logistics chain to get them what they need when they need it, it doesn't matter. They're useless if they don't have any equipment. So, thinking about this, right? How do you become a prepared individual? How do you become a Minuteman? In a logistical sense. So, a Minuteman, your primary job is to defend your home and your community. I look at it to where there is a difference between a group of people that are Minuteman joining together and a militia. The idea being there's a different, if I am a prepared person individually and I am ready to respond at a moment's notice, and so is my neighbor and his neighbor and his neighbor, right? We are Minutemen that could potentially coordinate together or work as a community defense in a pinch, but we have not necessarily trained together or spent that time to form into a unit, which is where I would separate a group of Minutemen from a militia. So let's look at this. Let's look at Minuteman logistics, right? So some of the things we're going to need to stock up on as a Minuteman, because the first thing is you need to make sure your homestead or house, apartment, wherever you live is well stocked and safeguarded while you're out responding to a Minuteman event, right? If you don't have things at home, that can sustain whoever you have to sustain at home, if you're by yourself, that's fantastic. But, if you've got a family, if you don't have them taken care of, you can't go off and do Minuteman things. And a lot of people need to stop and think about that. You can have $3,000 of kit and, $5,000 nod setup and a $4,000 rifle and be ready to roll. But if, your family doesn't have any food when you roll, you're no good to anybody. So let's kind of break this down. So the first thing I want to talk about is food. So for those who are unaware, or those who haven't gotten around to doing it yet, even FEMA or the government agencies that suck at their jobs admit that you need to have on hand a minimum of 2 weeks worth of food and water to get you through any type of crisis. I recommend a minimum of 3 months. Now, ideally, you would store up as much food as your storage space and situation allows for. If you're in a tiny apartment that's studio, you're probably going to have less food storage space than someone in a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and an extra shed out back and a garden, right? And the types of food you're going to store are different. So it's going to be dependent upon how many people you have in your house. How many people do you have to feed? What kind of food do you eat? Things like this, right? So I kind of recommend for those, who might be starting at this to definitely get up to the 2-week mark first and then build up from there. If you can jump right into the 3-month supply, that would be fantastic. Now you're probably thinking, okay, how do I do this? Well, for those who have the skill and the knowledge, the know-how, and the equipment, an easy way to do this is canning, right? Our grandparents did it. For some of us, our parents did it. You can can your food. You can home can your own food, pressure can it, and store entire meals, in a mason jar, stored away for a long period of time, years even. And, it can be something to where you do an extra meal once a week and you set it aside, something fairly simple. It could be maybe you do certain fruits or vegetables, things like that you store away. I've seen people do entire meals, chicken, all kinds of stuff. So canning is an option. Buying non-perishables or canned food items or long-term food items, things like spaghetti noodles, top ramen, things like this, things that, don't really go bad. And if they do, they go bad years down the line, so that you can store them quickly. You can store them for a long period of time. You could store them indefinitely in theory. To my knowledge, I don't think spaghetti expires. I'm sure it probably has a best by date, things like this on it. But, I'm sure that you could go in and get a 5-year spaghetti noodle, throw it in some hot water. It might taste kind of funky, but it'll probably be okay. I could be wrong. For my Italian friends out there, I'm sorry. But yeah, so that's an option. There are tons of companies out there, Food for Patriots, My Patriot Supply, Meal Supply, like a ton of these different survival food companies where they specialize in what is basically a freeze-dried or dehydrated meal where you add water. It's in a Mylar bag or some similar type of storage device. Usually shelf life, they say, of 25 years, and it's basically add water, stir it around, season to taste, and you've got a meal. And then this can be a really big help to a lot of people for those who don't know how to meal prep or aren't good at cooking. That it's already done for you. All you have to do is add water and heat it up. Some of them you don't even have to heat, depending on what it is. You can get evaporated milk like that. You can get powdered milk. You can get different types of things to have a variety of things to drink as well. You can get desserts, dinners, breakfasts. It's one of those things where if you don't know where to start and you just like to throw money at a problem, if you have the money for it, you can just go out and buy a 3-month supply or a year supply or a 2-week supply and just keep it stashed away. And as long as it's stored properly, you will have the food for later. Some of us, we've got boxes of MREs. We've got those, shuttled away somewhere. We probably have some broken down into our kit. MREs are a good way to do it. Humanitarian MREs, honestly, are not that bad. They're way better than the normal MREs. They're not great, but they're way better than the normal ones. Even normal MREs, though, I've spent 11 years in the military. They've come a long way. A lot better flavors, a lot better stuff in them. So MREs are a great option as well to store for food. But let's say, you're someone out there and you're like, hey, man, that's all well and good, but, I'm on a shoestring budget. I don't have any money. I don't see how I'm going to be storing up this foods all that long. Well, for something like that, I would say that it's not hard and it's not expensive to store up food. If you do it over time, you can get away with doing it bit by bit. And one of the ways you can do this, is but my son eats spaghetti like it's going out of style, right? So what I used to go do is the store used to have 10 for 10 packs of spaghetti, right? So you buy the 10 for 10 and then, you put 8 on the shelf, you put 2 away. Or you buy 12, you put the 10 on the shelf, you put 2 away. You get 4 for 5 cans, of green beans or something, $4 for 5 cans. So you buy your 5 cans. Well, then you only put 4 on the shelf and you shuttle 1 away. Or you buy 5 and you get the deal and you just buy 1 at full price or something like that, right? You go out of your way, You spend a couple extra bucks, buy a pack of spaghetti noodles, couple cans of beans, a bag of rice and beans, something like that. Budget if you can an extra $20. Go buy a pound of beans, 2 pound bag of beans, 2 pound bag of rice, and some spaghetti noodles, maybe some sauce. Shuttle it away back at the counter, in the garage, wherever you can, that it can be stored properly, and set it aside, set it away. I think there's great ways to do that. Getting like I said, non-perishable food is a big thing, something that can last you a long time. Another thing to think about too with the food, is the thing about it too is everyone's like, you got to have this food for an emergency. No one talks about necessarily what those emergencies are. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be a crap hit the fan scenario. It doesn't always have to be end of the world, Russians falling from the sky, we've been EMP'd, anything like that. If you've got imagine this, right? Imagine you lose your job. If you had a 3-month food supply stashed away, if money's tight, like it is for a lot of us right now, and you lost your job, you have 90 days worth of food stored away. It might not be great food, might not taste amazing, might not be a fresh burger or a sweet steak or something like that, but it's something. And if you're really strapped for cash at that point, that money can go elsewhere to other things while you try to get back up on your feet. You've got 90 days of backup food supply to figure that out. And so for me, I think that's a huge security thing right there. For that. Also, for those who live in areas that are more prone to natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, things like that. You guys know good and well what happens when hurricane season or tornado season or different things come through, and you might be left without power or without, different types of amenities to where you whatever food you have on hand, like that's what you got. You can't go to the store and get more. Or you don't have any money to go do so, or the roads are too bad, or whatever it may be. You got to stock up for these emergencies. And if you're already stocked up, then you don't have to dip into those supplies. We should all be packing food in our 3-day bags, or depending on how your kit loadout is or what your mission set is, having some food and stuff like that with you. But we all have stuff like that in our kit, and we all talk about tortillas and peanut butter, or I pack an MRE, or I cut an MRE down, or I only bring this, and that. And that's all well and good. But that's thinking in the idea of running off a logistical train that's just you and only for 3 days. And we need to start thinking in longer terms. Because the more you can provide for yourself, the less the government has control over you. So you need to start thinking about, how can I store up food for long term? The ideal goal, in my eyes, in a perfect world, is to have, like I said, 2 weeks is the bare minimum. In my eyes, I can't speak today. In my eyes, I'd like to think that 3 months is a better way to look at it, is a better goal to get to. But realistically, if you could get to a year of food storage, if not more, to where if something were to happen, you had an entire year worth of food supply, depending on the scenario that happens, and depending on the equipment you have in your living situation, that gives you not only a year's worth of food, but it gives you the time that you need to kind of figure out what to do now and how to replace it, whether that's scrounging for more stuff or growing your own food and waiting for crops to grow, whatever it may be. That buys you time. And if it's a shorter lived scenario, that potentially buys you friends. Food is a thing that I think is often overlooked as a tool and a weapon. Governments have used food to control people in a lot of ways. And you can do the same thing. Now, I'm not advocating that you be a total douchebag about hoarding your food kind of thing, right? And making people bow to your will, anything like that. But what I'm saying is, let's say you need something done and you don't necessarily have the skills for it. But your neighbor does. But your neighbor wasn't the most prepared person. But you've got a good relationship with him. But, he just didn't ever take that preparedness stuff to heart. He's got kids, and they're hungry. And you've got more food than you know what to do with. And it's a scenario where, everyone's hurting. Well, if you need his set of skills, it's probably a lot easier to convince him to help you out, to make a friendship, and to make one less enemy on that block to come after you. If you were to, maybe help, send over a care package, something like that, a little bit of food to help out, right? That's going to go a long way. Everyone has these scenarios that it's going to be like, I'm going to hide in my house, lock the doors. Anyone coming and asking for food is getting a double-out buck to the face. And while that may be the case in some scenarios, and you definitely don't want to telegraph to everyone that you've got food and be that guy, you could instead make positive relationships with those neighbors and build that community, which is something you should be doing in theory ahead of time, to where you're not seen as a threat, you're not seen as a hoarder at the end of it, you're seen as a gracious person, right? And people are appreciative of you, and they are willing to defend you because of the way that you treat each other. That is something that should be the goal when it comes to food. Another thing to think about as well, my biggest thing I like to harp on when it comes to food, because a lot of people don't take it seriously for food storage or storing up on food from the ideas of a Minuteman. You can be the hardest charging dude out there. You can have the baddest kit, be the best to go. You can be the most morally upright and convicted person about whatever your personal beliefs are. But if your wife or your kids are looking at you and they are starving and they haven't eaten in weeks, and someone comes along and offers them food, your ideals are going to go out the window because you're going to put your family's survival above your ideologies, right? And above your personal convictions. And throughout history, men have offered up and turned their backs on everything they have believed in for bread to feed their families. And the way that you can afford to not do that, the way that you can afford to not have to do that, to not have to bow and bend the knee and give up on everything you believe and to die to your own convictions, is to make sure that you're prepared so that you don't have to. So, that depressing note out of the way, moving on to water. So water's a huge one, right? We all have water coming out of the tap, but a big thing to think about is if electricity goes out, your water in your tap, for most of us around the country, operates off an electric pump. So there it is. It's gone. Goodbye, right? So storing water is probably the hard part because as much as we humans use per day, we don't usually have the space for it to store it. So with that, I think I've heard estimates in the past before where something like 55 gallons is used each day or something like that, to where between showers and bathing and brushing your teeth and washing dishes, things like this, as well as drinking on top of it per person in the household or something like that. And it's a stupid high amount of water that you wouldn't think it would be that high. So the thing is, having one pack of water bottles isn't going to cut it. It helps, but it's not going to cut it. So you definitely need to have good amounts of water on hand. Now, obviously, there's going to be some lifestyle changes, maybe not bathing every day and making, to make that water last, maybe reusing water from one activity for another activity, depending on what it is. Maybe using the water you cleaned the dishes with to water the food or, that you're growing, things like that. But you're going to need water for all of this. So one, it helps to definitely have water on hand. Now, one way to do this, again, similar to stocking up on a budget, a 40-pack of water is usually $3-4 if you go down to any supermarket. So I would recommend go down and every time you go to the store, pick up another pack of water. If that's all you can afford, right? Stash it away. Or go pick up one of those, 2-gallon milk jugs of water or whatever it is, stash it away. And, just go set it aside, put it somewhere, don't think about it, don't touch it. One thing to consider, though, is depending on what the container is that the water comes in, some of those are biodegradable, some of those degrade over time. So, keep track of that, keep kind of an idea of what's going on. The same thing, and the similar idea with your food, you want to first in, first out. So whatever you put in first, that's what needs to be the first thing you pull out of. Water, when put into like water bottles or like 2-liter bottles, can sometimes over time, the plastic can kind of like leak into the water and give it a really crappy taste. Sometimes you get like microplastics, things like that. So these are things to consider. One thing I do is that anytime my family orders a pizza or we get a 2-liter bottle of soda, something like that, or a milk jug, what I do is I usually wash them out real good, and then I fill them with water, and I stick them in a counter in my garage. Now, my idea with this is because of that, I'm planning on leaving these here long term, and I don't plan on refilling them constantly, is to use them as non-drinking water. So water for other everyday activities, if that were to come down to it, on top of the other water and things that I've stored. So The thing to consider again is sometimes these things, things break, they go bad, cans break, or certain types of bottles break down over time. And if that's the case, a great thing you can use them for at that point is use them as a target, right? Go shoot. They're full of water. Go take them to the range. Go shoot them. Go have some fun. There's tons of activities and things you can do with these as well. But it's something that I think is an easy way to have a way to store water on hand that most people don't think about. Another thing to consider as well is not just having the water on hand, but knowing how to get water and to sanitize it. So most of us, we all have things about, I've got X amount of canteens and iodine tablets on my kit, or I've got a Life Straw or a Sawyer water filter, or whatever the cool new, hotness is for water filters. And while these are all well and good, having one of those in your kit doesn't help your family at home, right? So there are industrial size things you can get. You get through the survival food places, you can get, gravity filters, all kinds of different filters that you can have at home that can do fairly large quantities of water. And you can get, basically a bucket of dirty water, throw it in there, comes out clean the other end. You can still boil it if you want to. But having things necessary around you to be able to collect the water as well as, sanitize it and make it good for using is going to be a key skill to have. Now, with that, if you knowing where your water sources are and what contaminants may be in that water, it's going to be a huge thing as well. If you've got a local creek that runs through town or a lake nearby, something like that, taking into consideration how far it's going to take you to get water, how much water can you bring back? Do you have a way to bring it back easily? Is everybody else doing the same thing? Are you getting water upstream or downstream from the guy pooping in the water? These are all things to consider and all things to think about when it comes to the water aspect. So moving on, we'll move on to things like medical. Medical is another good thing to where, again, it's not as much about having the equipment as it is also having the know-how. So I highly recommend everyone should have, if they don't already, an IFAK, which is an individual first aid kit or like a trauma kit, already on your shooting and scooting gear. So on all your tactical gear, you should already have a medical kit and have it easily accessible. You should know what's in it, when and stuff expires, and you should know how to use it. I usually also advocate having a first aid kit or a second IFAK in a vehicle or in every one of your vehicles, because you're more likely to use it in a traffic accident than you are in a shooting incident. Also, having like a basic first aid kit in your house. These are bare minimums that I recommend. On top of this, I think a lot of people should have a very extensive medical inventory. So things like splints, crutches if possible, but really whatever you can get your hands on medical-wise and whatever you are comfortable with using. The big thing I would recommend, again, if there's some kind of very specialized medical equipment, don't waste your money on it if you have no idea what it is or how it works, because in the middle of a crisis is not the time to learn. Now, if you're willing to go pay and take the classes or courses or whatever you got to do to get, to know how to use this stuff, whether you have to get certified on something or whatever it is, I highly recommend doing that. I highly recommend everyone here, if you haven't already, go through a CPR class, go through a first aid class. If you can, go to a TCCC class, a tactical combat casualty care. It's basically combat first aid. Go to as many medical courses as possible. Some of these are free and put on by local fire departments or EMTs. Some of these you have to pay money for. Some you might have to go to an actual training course and pay good money to go to. But anyone who has the capability to teach this, and obviously vet your instructors, go out and get that knowledge from them. I highly recommend it, because when it comes to medical stuff, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be simple fixes that will save a lot of lives. That's another thing to think about as well, is when it comes to this, you're not going to have a doctor on standby. You might get lucky and have one in your neighborhood or something like that, but you're not going to have a fully staffed emergency room. If someone screws up and winds up with a hole in their leg, you got to know how to do what to do and how to patch that up in the best way possible until you can at least either one, let their body heals if it can, depending on the injury, or two, you can get them to somebody that can do something about it. So I highly recommend stocking up on medical supplies and the know-how of how to use them. Another thing to consider with this as well is heating, as well as ways to cook your food. So something that I don't see talked about a lot about is, we talk about EMPs, we talk about SHTF scenarios. Where I live and where I have lived in the past, it gets really cold in the winter. The houses up here are insulated pretty well, but if there's no electricity, most of the houses don't have fireplaces anymore. So you got to think of ways of how to keep your home warm without burning it to the ground. So cooling isn't too much of a huge deal up here. It does get kind of warm in the summer, but honestly, if there's no electricity, you're probably just going to suck it up and suffer. That's really your only option, unless you can come up with a way to try to keep yourself cooled down. But coming up with ways to heat your house that are not a risk or a hazard, as well as ways to cook your food. So if you can get, if you got a fire pit in the backyard and you can cook over a fire, fantastic. If you've got one of those propane camping grills, even better. Having a bunch of propane on tap or a grill outside, something like that, are great ways to do that. Because another thing to think about is you might have food stored up long term, but it might also require water and heat to cook. If you're in an apartment and you don't have a grill or something to cook on like that, you can do an open flame, and that's your plan, you might be in for a really crappy time. So having equipment like that on standby is nice to have. Another thing that's nice to have as well is tools. So, more than just your typical, like I call it like your dad set, like what everyone gets dad for Father's Day, where it's like the cheap knockoff Craftsman set, at Walmart or whatever, that's like $40, and then you get a couple sockets, a wrench, a ratchet, and like a crappy hammer, something like that, that's better than nothing. But, having actual good tools, having hammers, having nails, having saws, a really good thing too, if we're talking SHTF, is going to be things that are hand powered versus mechanical, if you can find them. Having things like these on hand are going to be huge. One, you're probably going to have to do a lot of repairs and build stuff yourself by hand if that kind of scenario comes about. Two, anything that you're going to need to do to shore up your home's defenses, maybe like board windows or, block access to different things, create some kind of defensive structure. If this is your plan to bug in or anything like that in a oh crap scenario, you're going to need to have the tools to do so. And it's not going to look super awesome when you're trying to bang the nails in through the plywood with the buttstock of your rifle, because that's all you have. It's going to be really, really good to have a hammer and a few other things on hand to make sure that everything goes smoothly and that you can, do your actual job. So now that we've kind of talked about some of these things as far as like how to store, what kind of logistics you're looking at here at home, and I'm sure I'm missing more, and there's a lot more to go over. Some other things to consider about with this as well is, in my ideas of Minuteman logistics, is the idea of a logistical community, right? So I think that the huge part of this, outside of kind of a checklist that this first half has been of just kind of random things that you should be having on hand. And I specifically left out weapons and ammo on this because I feel like that is something that we all already should know. And I guess I'll cover it really quick just in case there's anyone listening here who doesn't already think of that. One, obviously have whatever firearms or weapons you intend to use, and then have an adequate amount of ammunition. And I don't mean 50 extra rounds in the back closet. I mean, ideally at least 1,000 rounds of your main rifle caliber, and ideally at least 500 rounds of your pistol caliber, and ideally at least 1,000 plus or more, hopefully a lot more, of 22 if you have it. So realistically, I'd like to see people have thousands of rounds, but for those who are just beginning, 1,000 is a good place to get to as a benchmark. So moving past that, the thing about, a logistical community, you can't do everything all the time at once. There are going to be things you are going to need help with. There are going to be things you are going to need assistance with, and projects that need to get done, things that need to happen there's going to be things that are going to have to require more than one person. Even if you've got a good group of dudes and, some solid goon boys or whatever, you're going to need some help. It is much easier to ask help from neighbors and friends that you already know than it is to go and ask help from complete strangers and try to get their trust during an oh crap scenario. So, if like me, you live in a neighborhood with actual neighbors, even for those who live in an apartment, get out and know your neighbors. Get out of your house, go talk to the neighbors, knock on the door, introduce yourself. I know that seems like a weird thing to do these days for a lot of people, but really it's not. And a lot of people respond fairly positive to it, depending on where you're at. I'll give you that. Depending on where you're at. But go out, knock on the door. Hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm the neighbor down the street. Just wanted to say hi, introduce myself. Kind of just trying to get to know who my neighbors are. Invite people over. Have cookouts. Have, block parties. Do whatever you got to do. Even if it's just saying hi, shaking someone's hand, offer to mow someone's lawn. Do little things like this to help build trust with your community. Because when things go south, your community around you, not like your tactical shooting, but community. Because those guys, yeah, you're going to count on them as well. But if you're scattered all over the county or all over the city that you live in, that's not necessarily going to help you as much as your neighbor next door. So, you learn from them, talk to them. What kind of skills do they have? What do they do for a living? Do they have a bunch of tools? Do they have things that you might potentially need during a crisis? Or things that you do you have things that they might need? Can you guys benefit from each other? Do you get along? Do they have children? Do you have children? Are there certain things and ways that you can help each other out, right? Maybe you don't know crap about cars. Maybe the other guy is an awesome mechanic and he can help you with any kind of mechanical issue at all. And maybe for this scenario, vehicles are still working, but you have an issue. He could probably help you. Probably be a good guy to have on your side and to be friends with. Maybe someone's a farmer or a gardener and gardens and grows a bunch of food in their backyard. Might be someone you want to talk to or someone who's got chickens, things like this. Maybe you don't have a lot of experience when it comes to the shooting and scooting side and you're more of a homesteader. Maybe the guy down the street's, a combat veteran that's got a lot of skill in that aspect. It's things like this to where it used to be fairly normal for people to know their neighbors, talk to them on a daily basis, and kind of know the ins and outs of each other's lives. And in a no-crap scenario, this is going to need to be a necessity because otherwise you're going to be enemies. You're going to have enemies every driveway instead of a consolidated, coordinated block. And if someone were to come and try to do something to those people or to you, it's a lot harder for roving bands of bad guys to decide to stop at a neighborhood than it is for them to stop at a house. If they come to a neighborhood and see the entire neighborhood is ready to roll and the entire neighborhood is ready to defend each other, odds are they probably aren't looking for a fight that big. But if they see that everyone is inside their own homes and sticking to themselves and they're not going to come poking their head out there, they're not helping that guy next door. They don't know who he is. Well, odds are you got no one coming to help you. And at that point, you're on your own and the mob's, coming after you. So I kind of recommend that you go out, you meet your friends, meet your neighbors, and you get on good relations with the people around you, and you build that sense of community so you guys can hopefully come together during a time of crisis. I think that the biggest thing out of this is that, you look at different things, look at different countries, for example, like Switzerland. I think the Swiss have a really good example of kind of what I'm talking about here. There was a concept that came around, I believe it was around a World War II time, could be right after during the early Cold War, that suburban Swiss towns were designed to where you would have two houses facing the south, two houses facing the north, and they had backyards that all connected, and they were all fenced in. So it was basically kind of like your own little community, right? And each backyard would grow a different crop. So Joe on the bottom left would grow carrots. Joe on the bottom right would grow corn. I'm just throwing these out. I don't know what the Swiss grow. One guy would grow potatoes and the other guy would grow peas, right? And the guy with peas would trade with everybody else. And the guys with corn would grow everybody else. And the whole community would do this, right? That would just be one block in a small town. So when the whole village is doing it, you have a variety of crops being grown, a variety of food to be shared, and everyone has a shared interest and value in their community to help each other and to see each other thrive and to trade with one another and develop a good relationship. So in the time of crisis or invasion, they're all able to help feed each other. So that's another thing to consider as well. Is how close is your community to something like that? Speaking of close, another thing too is how close are you to your neighbors physically? If you want to build that type of community, how close are you to those people? Are you somewhere in a very rural area where your next neighbor is a couple miles away? Because guys might have like a really awesome, solid defense plan, sharing food, all this other stuff. But in the middle of the night, when someone comes over to, bust into his farm and take what he's got, and he radios up and, goes over whatever kind of communication system you have, if it's going to take you 15, 20, 30 minutes to get over there, that's going to be a problem. Versus the guy right next door. Each has their pros and their cons, with that being said. So that kind of goes back with one thing I forgot to mention too is communication. Going through this idea of logistics, comms are their own type of logistics as well, and making sure that you have a way to communicate with others, not outside of your cell phone, like a Baofeng radio or something similar, but also establishing those communication networks with the people you are trying to communicate with. But just buying a Baofeng and going, all right, guys, we all got it, that's great, doesn't necessarily work if you don't have a communication plan figured out and set in stone and saying like, hey, this is how we are going to get a hold of each other. This is what happens if we can't. This is, if I'm too far away, I'm going to go here and I'm going to radio in at these times. And having these in place really help. So speaking of plans like that too, communication plans, not just with, other guys and other Minutemen and other family members and other community members, having one with your family as well is going to be hugely important too. In this type of scenario, you need to have some type of communication plan and logistics plan with your spouse, significant other, children, whoever you live with, to all be on the same page. If you're looking at, for example, your food supply and saying, okay, I've got 3 months supply of food if we all have 1 serving per meal, right? That might not necessarily kill that hunger bug, but keep you alive if that's the case for the 1 serving per meal type of thing. Well, if you're the only one that knows that and you go out on an operation for something or on a mission, or you go out in the woods, go do, out in the woods type Minuteman stuff, and you come back and everyone's been eating 4 servings to stay full, well, now that's put a huge dent in your food supply, and now you're going to be pissed off, and you're going to have no one to blame but yourself because nobody else read your mind, nobody else knew your ideas. So you need to talk about this kind of stuff with your spouses. Another thing to consider too, I know this is kind of backtracking onto the food thing, I'm kind of on a rant at this point. When it comes to the food thing specifically, if everybody else on your block is starving, you don't want to be the fat kid on the block. You could take the route to say, let's just say you don't live in a very friendly area, you cut off all your neighbors, you decide you're just going to stick to yourself and do your own thing. That's fine and dandy. But when it's been a couple weeks and everybody else is pretty hungry and your family's looking pretty plump and they're not, they're going to know you got food. And they're going to get jealous, and they're going to get angry, and they're going to get mean and vindictive, and they're going to get violent. And they're going to try to come for your food. So kind of a gray man type of deal with this would be to, monitor your food intake. And I'm not saying starve your kids, but I'm saying you don't necessarily need to go for 3 and 4 helpings. If that's the case, try to match what everybody else has got going on, right? If other people are struggling, you don't want to look like you're being super awesome and succeeding, because people are going to take that in the wrong way. So with these things in mind, and there'll be follow-up posts on my Instagram kind of covering some more of these topics. With these things in mind, I think if you could cover the idea of having 3 months of food, having a bunch of water stored up, having medical supplies, a good amount of weapons and ammo, having things like lights on hand. That's one thing I forgot to mention too, as well as like candles or backup lighting, having ways to cook your food, the knowledge to know how to cook and disinfect your water and your food, and the ability to go out and try to build a sense of community in your area, I think you'll be pretty well off as a Minuteman to be able to step outside of your home for the duration of short-term Minuteman things and come home knowing that your family is going to be okay, or God forbid that something happens to you, that they have time to figure things out. So with that being said, if you can begin to check those boxes, or if you're to the point where you're like, Austin, I've been doing this a long time. I've got 6 months worth of food plus stacked away. I've got enough water to drown a small country. I've got communications gear lined up. I've got my own radio station. I've got ammo coming out my ears. My community loves me. We're all on the same page. What now? Well, that's what the next episode is going to be about. And this is now, if you've checked all these boxes and you've got yourself squared away, now you can begin to look for partners in that aspect. Now, granted, let me back that up. You should be looking for people of like-minded use anyway. But going into the idea from Minuteman to militia, being a militia requires a much larger logistical train and more people bringing things to the party than being a Minuteman does. So you have to get the Minuteman side squared away before you can realistically get the idea of being a militia. So with that being said, I'm sure I probably left a bunch of stuff out from what I wanted to say. And this is a little on the shorter side, but that's just with how we're working. Hopefully by next week, with the way my personal logistics have been working out, I'll be able to get Mike back on here, hopefully get a few other guest stars on here, and get back to the normal swing of things. So thank you guys so much for sticking with this. For those that may have missed the post, we added another country onto the listeners list of Sweden, which, again, you guys are so awesome, and I've been incredibly humbled having you guys interact with me on social media and share, the stories and such of this, and hearing from you guys has been awesome. For those who are listening, for my foreign listeners, my non-U.S. listeners, thank you so much for listening. I'd love if you guys could reach out sometime on my social media that's linked in the description. I'd love to talk to you guys and just kind of learn more about what got you interested into this, why you decided to listen, what keeps you coming back. So apparently 8% of our listeners, by the way, are Australian. So if you guys down in Australia, hopefully just keep up the good fight of whatever you're doing, listening to me. I appreciate it. But yeah, you guys are awesome. So all of my listeners are great. My sponsor is fantastic. With that being said, Men with Green Eyes, still our mid-tier 10. The description the link will be in the description. Mid-tier 10, get yourself some awesome gear. Boogeyman Actual's got some awesome stuff as well. Check him out. Check out their social medias. They're always doing cool stuff, always out and about doing some cool things. Great people in the community. Other than that, if you guys want ammo, guns, gear, anything like that, I do have a link tree on my social media at NotTheATFAJ. Anyway, check me out on there. If you're going to buy it anyway, if you buy it through me, definitely helps the channel out. Other than that, guys, it's been great talking to you. See you next time, and welcome back to Mid-Tier Thoughts.